Welcome to Russian History with Dr. Brovkin. Today I continue with a series of presentations on the presidency of Vladimir Putin. Last time I spoke about Putin and the oligarchs, and the issue was how Putin handled the oligarchs who controlled political power in the late years of President Yeltsin, and how he basically made them uh, unable to manipulate political process in Russia. Today, I deal with the second problem that Putin encountered when he became president, and that is the governor problem. Now, what is the governor problem? Here's 5 questions that I will try to answer. Who are the governors? How many there are? What is the constitutional setup that Putin inherited that is a problem? Uh, and finally, how he managed to resolve the problem. Uh, so, in the Russian Federation, there are 89 provinces, and they're called subjects of the Federation, which means they have representatives in the elected institutions, and that is in the upper chamber, which is called Federation Council. The way it was when Putin inherited the power was that 89 governors were the ones who were represented in the upper chamber, in the Federation Council. They were untouchable. I mean, they had inviolability of person. They couldn't be tried. They were at the same time governors and members of the upper house, which means they could block any legislation. And essentially, they controlled both their own provinces and the upper house. So this was the constitutional setup. The source of their power officially was the people, because they were elected by open ballot, and they represented the people in their provinces. In reality, the source of their power was the industry in their provinces. And especially if this was not an agricultural province, but especially if it was a province in Siberia or in the Urals, where you had huge plants. And in the 1990s, they were all privatized. And privatized sounds very innocent, but in real life, this privatization was skewed, and it went into the criminal organizations. I wouldn't name them now because this is going to create a lot of controversy. Those who are interested can read about those. But the point about criminal organizations is that they were former KGB, former party officials, former local officials in the structure of power, and they essentially manipulated the privatization process, that they became the owners of huge aluminum plants, nickel plants, metallurgical plants, and once they owned them, they controlled the money supply in that particular province, which means that the governors were their stooges, they were their instrument, and they were tool, couldn't do anything without them. So in a sense, the governors in the 1990s were in the hands of privatized industry. Or, to put it more rudely, they were in the hands of the mafia bosses who privatized Russian industry into their pockets. Now, privatized again simply means they owned it, but they didn't own them to develop them. What happened was that they were engaged in what I called in one of my articles is asset stripping. So they were basically ruining their own industries, parking money overseas. I wrote another article you could find, which is making money, moving money, parking money overseas, that describes in great detail how these cliques of nouveau riche, the controlled Russian industry, just shipped billions and billions of dollars overseas, and they were controlling the governors. Sometimes governors were their pay, sometimes they were, in fact, a part of those criminal organizations. So that's the problem. That's the problem that Putin inherited. He couldn't do anything because they controlled the money supply, they controlled the taxes, they controlled elections, and they controlled the Federation Council. Now, as of 1993, many of the provinces started to refuse paying to the federal budget. And again, the president Yeltsin, of course, couldn't do anything about it because he had no power. Now, what means is that they started telling local people that we're paying more than we're getting out of Moscow. Why should we be paying to Moscow? And they just basically stopped paying taxes. And that is the time when the Russian state was bankrupt. It had no money to pay to the military, to pay to the police. The police privatized the streets and started charging people for whatever they did in their services. Medicine collapsed, education collapsed. People just had no wages of any kind. So this is the problem that was compounded um, by the governor power. Now, another thing is that many not only stopped paying taxes, but started talking about seceding from Russia. And this is something that really worried a lot of people, including the newly elected president. He started his rule, Putin did, by crushing the Chechnya separatist movement, a little republic in the North Caucasus, by military force, and basically sending a very strong signal that the Soviet Union collapsed and there's nothing we can do about it. But Russia is not going to collapse, and he's not going to allow any province to even think about any kind of secession. So this is the situation with the governors that he encountered. Now the next thing, of course, that the governors controlled local everything. Local media, local taxes, local everything. And the media, of course, allowed them to manipulate public opinion, to control the airways, and then make little things that would be pleasing to the local public, such as open up, a new kindergarten or a new school or whatever, and cater to the wishes of the local people, so that they could blame for everything that's wrong the federal government and present themselves in a very positive light. And in that way they controlled the electorate, and basically they were getting 70, 80, 90% of the vote in local elections that they controlled on their own and shipped their money overseas. How do they operate? Most of the time this would be called corruption, which is use of public office for personal gain. The way it works is that you control favored companies, you distribute contracts to the companies that are favorable to you, to your friends and relatives. You siphon off revenue, you have a budget to construct a road, and that this budget is double what it's supposed to cost. On books it looks all pretty good and clean. The so many million was spent on building the road. In fact, it was half as much, and the other half goes into private pockets that then share the money with the governor. You have all kinds of ways that the governor can participate in siphoning off revenue, and that is what was going on. Putin was asked when he once visited the city of Magnitogorsk, which is a major center of metal production in Siberia. He was asked by one of the workers why did he do uh, what he did with governors, and I'll explain that later. But his answer is very important. He basically said because the governors are in the hands of local business. Um, and he didn't elaborate, but this is much more than just in the hands of local business. It should be translated that the governors are in the hands of criminal organizations that are siphoning off the revenue at your expense, and that has to be crushed. This would have been an honest answer. Um, so, some of them are talking about splitting from Russian Federation, not paying taxes, um, and this is now the solution. So how does he deal with this? He has a big problem. Taxes not paid, the governors control the Federation Council. What can he do? And this is what Putin did. This is very interesting. So first thing that he did, he created 7 new federal districts, which are huge areas encompassing several provinces. So Russia has 89 provinces, and this is 7. So like a bunch of provinces would be the huge federal district, and that would be his man over there who would be overseeing the activities of the governors. So a kind of watchdog system. The next thing he did, which is very, very tough, he deprived the governors of electability. So he said, you're not going to be elected anymore. I'm going to appoint you. This was pretty much a revolution, and it was unconstitutional, strictly speaking. But he changed the constitution. Putin likes to do everything legally, so he changed the constitution and the composition of the Federation Council. And there are two stages of this. The first stage is his first 2 terms from 2000 to 2008. And then there was a mediative period, and then he comes back as a president. So in the first stages, he basically disarmed the governors by stripping of them of their power in the Federation Council. He now appointed the governors, and he took himself a right to dismiss them if he felt that they were not up to his standards. And then it went even further, and that is that the composition of the Federation Council was totally reshaped. Instead of it being a collection of governors, Putin changed it to a new system. And today, for example, in the Federation Council, there's 189 people, which means that you have 2 persons per province, and one of them is a representative of the legislative branch of the province, and the other of the executive branch of the province. So the governor does not automatically get a position. Moreover, he cannot be both. He can either be a governor and then govern his province, or sit in Moscow, which is a permanent body of representatives. So he separated the governors from being representing in the upper house. It created them absolutely separately. And then, of course, instead of the direct appointment by the president, as was the case from 2004 to 2011, he made it a little bit better, or a little bit more benign, in that the local authorities, legislative and executive, offer to the president 3 candidates. He chooses one of them, and then they have to be confirmed by the local assembly. So this is a kind of a more democratic procedure, that there's some kind of a choice, but the principle remains the same. They are accountable to the president, and he decides if they stay or if they don't. Now, many people have said since then that this is authoritarianism, that this is dictatorship, that this is not real democracy, that Putin is building, a kind of a personal dictatorship with the governors being controlled, and the upper house of parliament being controlled by him. Yes, strictly speaking, that is true. He is building authoritarianism. But what I could add as an opinion is that this kind of authoritarianism is certainly better than the kind of democracy that existed in the 1990s. Because you in the 1990s had a criminal gangs who were ripping off Russian resources and shipping them overseas, enriching themselves in the process and manipulating the elections. So the question is not in some kind of abstract democracy, in a kind of a political science model that happy citizens have a free choice and they make this free choice in free elections. This actually in real life doesn't exist, not even in the United States. It all depends who controls the media, how much money they have, what are the targeted areas of media propaganda, boosting up this or that candidate, and basically where does the money come from? and for what purpose. So in Russia, the difference was between mafia bosses controlling local governors or the president controlling local governors. Well, I would rather the president, even if it's not just Putin, because the president, being a president, wants to preserve the country. That's his job. And he wants well-being of his country, which is not the case of governors' aspirations, because what they want is their power and their money, first and foremost. So in that sense of view, yes, I am for authoritarianism, and I think Putin did a great job by, this by eliminating the power of the governors, resolving that problem, and creating a government structure that can function for the benefit of Russia. Thank you, and please subscribe to Russian History with Dr. Brovkin. Next time.